Julia Fisher. Welcome to this week's edition of The Olive Tree and another story direct from Israel to give you an insight into what God is doing there today through the lives of believers who live there, Jews and Arabs. My guest today is Nat Silverman. We met at a coffee shop in Tel Aviv on a rather noisy street, as you will hear. Israeli society today is a salad bowl of people who've come to live there from the four corners of the world. Jews from Russia, Tunisia and Morocco, Europe, South America, North America, Ethiopia, India, to name but a few. Nat came from the United States, and today he's working for a congregation called Adonai Roi in downtown Tel Aviv, a busy, mainly secular city. Nat was in his late teens when his parents announced they were moving to Israel. So what was he going to do? He faced a dilemma, as he now describes.
I was born in South Florida. My family and I, we lived there almost my entire adolescent life.
So were your parents originally from America, or did they come from somewhere else to America? What's the story?
Well, my dad was born in the States, but I guess you could say his grandfather came over from Ukraine, and my mother actually came over from South America, from a city, Quito, Ecuador.
Everybody's got an interesting story about where they come from. So you came over to Israel in your mid-late teens. That must have been quite traumatic for you.
It was, and if I wouldn't have gone through the process that I did, I think it would have even been more traumatic. I was actually in China at the time when my father said, listen, the paperwork went through, we're moving to Israel, the coming year. And so I was teaching English in China for about 6 months, and I was nearing the end of my time, and my dad says, listen, you got to come home. I was thinking about re-upping my assignment during that time. And he says, listen, you got to come home, we got to pack. And so I said, listen, Dad, I'm not moving with you. You guys move ahead, and I'm gonna do what I need to do. I'm gonna join college. I'm gonna get a good scholarship. So my dad says, well, pray about it. But I knew that if I did, I knew that something was gonna happen. So I actually took that time not to pray about it, and I would go for runs. I would run each day to kind of like get it in the back of my head and kind of like drone it out. And on one of these runs, I ran up to the top of a hill, and I just stopped and broke down. It was just like I can't explain it to you, but I just started weeping, and I was like, all right, God, listen, you got me. You do what you want, and I'm gonna trust you. And so when I got home later that year, I said, all right, guys, I'm with you guys. We're gonna move together to Israel.
Why did your parents want to come here?
Well, the story goes that when my mom agreed to marry my dad, she agreed on the condition that following year that they would move to Israel. Being that they're both Jewish, they felt the call back to the land, to move to the land of the Jewish people. And so my dad, of course, as any young guy to his fiance would say, was, of course, yes, next year. And that next year became the following year, and the following year, 6 children later, and 18 years later, we moved to Israel.
So you arrived here. Could you speak any Hebrew when you came here?
Well, I knew the basics, shalom, but I had a teacher when I was studying for my bar mitzvah, and he left me a Hebrew book. So basically I took that Hebrew book and I went through that Hebrew book, but speaking was very difficult still for me. And so when I got here, the government, they put you into what's known as an ulpan, which is basically a Hebrew course. It's an all-day course, and then in the evening they give you like 2 or 3 hours of homework, and then the next day you have this about 5 days a week. And it's super intensive for about 6 months, and that's one of the tools that really helped to get my Hebrew up and going.
How difficult was it for you to assimilate into Israeli society?
Well, coming from a Western society, it's very different here, and so I would say even during my time in the military, it was difficult for me to understand the mentality and the the social life here, because it's so different. One example is that the people tend to be a little bit harder, a little bit more critical, and very open about all the above. So something that maybe in a Western society we're a little bit more, how do you say it? Like, we won't say everything that's on our mind. Here, they'll say everything and more that's on their mind. And so it can actually come across as somewhat hurtful if you don't know how to take it, and also develop somewhat of a thicker skin, if you say. So that was one of the shocks. Another one was that everything belongs to everyone, because the society here came out of somewhat of a communist mindset. The communist mindsets that we are all family, we're all in this together. And so the original idea behind building up Israel was the driving idea was the kibbutzim. And so that communist mindset that we're all going to live together, we're all going to take care of one another's needs, a very tight-knit community. So that kind of mindset still develops today. I was on the bus going home from the army, and I had just bought myself a large sandwich, and I was starving. And I bite into my sandwich, and the lady next to me nudges me and says, "Can I have some?" And I was like, well, I was speechless, so I didn't even know what to say. So I just I was like, yeah, I just broke off a whole piece of a sandwich and just gave it to her, and she just like ate away. And another time I just opened up, like this package of chips or something, and I'm just eating it, and one of my soldiers just sticks his hand in and just starts, taking the chips, not without any request or. Anyway, so it's a whole different society, whereas in the States you never would take a sandwich from somebody or just dive your hand into, you request permission or somewhat. That would be considered rude. But here it's considered, oh, we're all family, and so I'll just do it. Not everyone is like that, but the culture is also very warm and very open about a lot of things, so personal life, everything. So there was just all these different things that were very interesting, and provided some of the challenges also for me to assimilate. But once I was able to get over those hurdles and start to understand the mentality and where it actually came from, that really helped me to assimilate. There's still days that I'll drive down the street and I'll be like, these are the worst drivers ever. But you know what? I love them.
You spent several years in the army, but it must have been hard at first.
Yeah, I was 7 years total in the regular army. I'm still serving in the reserve units. One of the reserve units in the military now. And my first year in the military was difficult. One of the biggest difficulties for me was the fact that I didn't get what I wanted. What I wanted to do was to become a performance violinist, and so I had asked them to put me in an audition so that I can be in the orchestra, and they refused. And so then I decided that I was also going to refuse an order. So I went to jail for refusing an order, and I was in jail for a couple days. And when I was released, I went down to my unit, and I was put in the tank unit. And I worked very hard for about 9 months, trying every day to get an audition to be a concert violinist in the orchestra. And each time I was passed up to a higher and higher general, until finally I got to the general that oversees all ground command, all ground forces. And he says, he wrote me a letter back after I had written him a letter. He says, I appreciate all the recommendations from your superiors, but I've looked over your profile, and you're a superior soldier and an excellent soldier, and we don't want to lose you. And so we're going to actually keep you in the tank unit. We wish you all the best in the rest of your service. So it was not easy for me to accept that, but I know that throughout my service, God was constantly trying to work on the one point that I don't hold on to anything that I think is mine, and he's still working on that even today.
So 7 years later, you emerged. What were you going to do with the rest of your life? Were you involved with a congregation at this time?
7 years later, when I was released from the military, I went to a bodyguarding company, and I started working for them. And I wasn't entirely happy. I thought I would be doing something that was military related. but I wasn't entirely happy. And then an opportunity came to work for Dugit Ministries. Avi Mizrahi said, "Hey, listen, I'm looking for a personal assistant. We think that you would be great." It just so happened that as he offered me the job, I was offered 2 other jobs, separately, but military related. And so I said, "Listen, God, I don't want to keep doing this on my own. I don't want to do the same mistakes like I did in the military." I said, "Listen, what do you want me to do?" And I felt such a strong peace about coming on as Avi's personal assistant. And so that's where I started. And from there, I progressed on to doing all different kinds of different jobs in the ministry. And today, my wife and I serve as the associate pastors in the congregation, Adonai Roi.
So you met your wife and you're involved in the congregation. Are you playing the violin again?
Well, I've been playing in different worship teams, and I've kind of found my niche there, using the gift that God has given me. I don't know if I'm ever going to go back to being a professional violinist, but I do know that right now I'm using my gift for His glory.
You've been listening to Nat Silverman, a Jewish believer from Tel Aviv, sharing his story. And we'll hear more from Nat on next week's programme. The Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab or Palestinian Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. If you'd like to know more about our work through our bi-monthly newsletter, including news about our upcoming tours, please either visit our website www.olivetreefund.org or write to me, Julia Fisher, OTRF, PO Box 402, Billingshurst, RH14 4BQ in the UK. Meanwhile, join me at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.